Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Warrior Podcast. I'm Frank Lardino. It's Mother's Day today. So for all you mothers out there, happy Mother's Day. For those mothers who are in heaven, happy Heavenly Mother's Day. My mother happens to be one of those. And some of you are mothers out there and not even knowing it. You have acted as mothers for people without actually having them as your children. And that would be my Aunt Rose. So happy Mother's Day to Aunt Rose. Today, we're going to talk about the code. What is a code? A code is a set of rules that you live by. Every individual sets their code. One of the warrior cultures that I like, and I mentioned them a lot, is the samurai warriors. They have a code called Bushido. There's multiple components to Bushido. Righteousness, honor, respect, honesty, courage, consistency, and self-control. These are the components of the code of Bushido. And the samurai live up to this code and honor this code, and it's what makes them so strong. They're such powerful warriors, and the culture is a very strong, cohesive culture. I have my own personal code, and I'm going to kind of explain to you how I came about with my code. One of the interesting things that I read was a study where they asked old people about their lives and what was important in their lives. And it turns out that we have 3 phases in our lives if we live long enough. The first phase is the work achieve phase. We are on the go all the time. We are, educating ourselves. We were very goal-oriented in that first third of our lives. If we live long enough, the next phase of our lives is giving back. How can we help our kids, our family? We start to think about giving back. And if we live long enough, and that's a capital I, capital F, if we live long enough, we start to think about our legacy. What are we going to leave behind? Will we be remembered? What does our life amount to? One of the things that really affected me was when I received a call on a Sunday afternoon from my best friend, Mike. He was crying on the phone and he said, "I have brain cancer. I'm going to die." He had a few tough days. He was bumping into things. He ended up in the hospital. He got scanned. He had stage 4 glioblastoma, very bad cancer. Right then, at that moment, I was punched in the mouth. And the reason why I was punched in the mouth is because I always live my life saying life is short and make the best use of your minutes, but I was not living my life in such a way where I was actually practicing that. So that shifted me from kind of phase 1, where it was the work achieve mode, right into what is my legacy. I really started to think about that. And so the first thing I did is I took a tally of my life. What had my life amounted to that point in time? And I said to myself, if I died today, what did I leave behind? So I started to think about, what legacy do I want to leave behind? Like, what I had to envision, like what I would want people to think about me after I was gone. And I had this vision of being in a casket and having people, come up to the casket, and what kind of things would I like them to say? So for instance, my sons, I would like my sons, I have 3 sons, to say, my dad was a warrior. He was a badass. He was tough. He never gave up. He was smart. He was a great advisor for me. He was a hard worker. He taught us by example, right? I want my sons to say that they would love to turn out to be the type of man that I was, right? So I set a high bar with my sons. And then, I had another bar for my friends. It was be similar. He was my best friend. In some cases, he saved my life. He was a first responder. He was a loyal friend. He was smart. Same thing with my family, maybe a mix of all those things. I would want them to say those things, and even acquaintances. I would love for acquaintances to come up to the casket and tell my family I met him and he told me something that I will never forget that helped change my life, etc. I set a really high bar, okay? And that bar determines what my own personal code is, right? For me to be able to leave that legacy behind, I have to have a very stringent code that I live by. And for me to execute that code, I have to be the best and strongest version of myself. Like, I really have to make sure I don't get caught up in my own personal storms, because I cannot be all those things to all those people if I'm in my own personal darkness. And we all have been in personal darkness, my friends. It's inevitable in life, but there's certain things that we can do, reframing, refocusing, where to focus our brain power. We can stay out of the darkness and actually create light in this dark world. This is part of the theme of my book and my life. So what wound up happening to me is I started studying the brain because I wanted to know, like, one, why am I an optimist? Why have I always been an optimist and try to solve problems and not get too caught up in emotions? So I started studying the brain and, emotions. And, we all have emotions, and emotions they're natural. They're part of what we need to survive. But it's the lack of managing the emotions that can lead us into troubled waters. In particular, lack of managing bad emotions can really botch up our time here on Earth. One of the emotions that we have built into us is anger. And anger, I believe we need for survival. But that type of anger is a specific type of anger, right? So, for instance, somebody tries to kidnap your little child right after you drop them off in the schoolyard, and you see it happening, you get angry and you have an adrenaline dump and you go stop that person, right? You trigger powers you didn't even know you have. That's a survival anger. But when we get angry in traffic and we get road rage, or we pound our fist on the desk because, something didn't go right, and that type of anger consumes us, we're not going to be our best and brightest. We are not going to be the best decision maker when we're angry. We're best when we're calm, when we can contain the anger, control the anger, keep the anger at the level that it needs to be, and not let the anger overwhelm us. And another really tough emotion is grief. I know people that they have been grieving for the loss of a loved one for decades. And it's not a small grief, it's a grief that's consuming, where they're in a state of depression all the time. They go visit the gravesite all the time, and their life is just lacking oxygen and vibrance and vitality because they've let grief overcome their life. Now, I know it's easier said than done, but I believe grief, there's an expiration to grief. We need to grieve for a certain amount of time, but we must be conscious of over grieving to the point where the loss of the person ruins our lives. Guys, we're all going to die. And I don't believe that we were created to grieve for the rest of our lives and our lives be ruined because somebody dies. It's just not designed that way. So what I do with the grief portion is I do grieve, but I feel like it's my responsibility to carry that person's life and life energy forward, that I make sure their legacy lives as long as possible. So I do two things. One, I commemorate that person in my mind. What did they mean to me? How did they affect my life? And then I also journal about that person. I put it in a written journal. So when I die, my thoughts on that person will live forever as long as that journal's in existence. And, that's my way of kind of easing the grief. I look at it as a fellow warrior fell on the battlefield. I'm going to pick up his or her sword, and I'm going to charge down the battlefield the rest of my life carrying their honor with me. So that's one of the ways I manage grief. And I think the biggest emotion, which can be absolutely paralyzing, is fear. When we don't manage fear, fear can actually limit our brain's ability to use its intelligence and reasoning power. This video is not about politics or whatever, but certain things have happened in the world in the last couple of years where people were overwhelmed by fear and they didn't use their intelligence. And they went out and they did what they were told. So part of the emotional management, I believe, is managing anger, grief, and fear. Those are three big ones. These are what I decided that I needed to manage best so I could be the strongest version of myself, so I can achieve this legacy that I want to leave behind, because it will enable me to execute my very stringent code. Now, I had a couple interesting things happen. It used to bother me when I would let somebody merge in traffic and they didn't wave thank you. And I thought to myself, I have to figure out how to reframe that so I don't get angry, right? Management of anger, when people don't wave and say thank you. What I wound up doing is I thought to myself, well, why am I letting that person in? Well, I'm letting that person in because I want to be polite to people, right? I want to show goodwill toward people, and maybe that will help them show goodwill to others, right? It's a pay it forward type of thing. And why do I do that? I do that because it's part of my code. So it's irrelevant whether they wave or not. I have satisfied a component of my code, right? I had a friend on Facebook. She's not even a dear friend. She's one of those friends I don't even know how we became friends. And she posted a little bit of a rant, and she said it was a rant about she had introduced her best friend to a guy that she didn't really know that well, but she picked up a good vibe from him, and they got together. They wound up getting married. They have kids. They're doing really well financially. They're like very well known. And her rant was, and neither of them ever said thank you to me. So I posted on her conversation there. And again, this is somebody I don't even know. And I said, I'm going to try and give you some thought process so this doesn't bother you anymore. I told her about her code. You didn't do this because you wanted to thank you for either of them. You did this because you had your best friend's interest at heart and you like to bring people together. You upheld your own code, and that is the reward, right? I think we get too hung up on the outcomes of our code. In other words, well, I didn't get a thank you or whatever. It doesn't matter. It's irrelevant. My Aunt Rose, I tell this story many times. Her and I were walking downtown when I was just a little boy, and I was holding her hand, and there was a homeless lady on the street, sitting on the sidewalk with her like this. And my aunt stopped. She reached in her purse, grabbed some money. She grabbed the lady's hand. She put the money in her hand and closed her hand like this. And I said, Aunt Rose, why'd you do that? She didn't even ask for anything. And the lady said, because she needed it, right? My aunt didn't receive a thank you. She didn't even, get a request for help by the lady. She just did it because my aunt's code is heavily founded in giving. And she taught me the highest form of living is giving. And that is why I have that, in my own personal makeup. The highest form of living is giving. So again, not to get too caught up in the outcome of living to your code, right? One of the really big things that happened to me in my life is I had a dear, dear friend, probably my best friend of all time. And, we got in a little argument, and he wound up getting so angry he left, and he didn't come back. I called him, texted him, wrote him letters. My wife wrote him letters for a year. But I stayed on it. And finally, something happened. I called him and left a voicemail. I said, I need your help. And he came to my help. And then the friendship rekindled for a year or two. Then it happened again. We got in an argument. He disappeared. He left angry. And this time I said, I'm done. I wasn't angry with him, but I didn't feel like reeling him in the first time was wrong because that was my code, right? And my godmother yelled at me. She said, I told you not to go after him the first time. You better not go after him this time. And I said, let me correct you on that. I needed to go after him the first time because I was upholding my code. And that's all that matters. It doesn't even matter about the outcome. It matters about upholding the code. So I want to, ask you guys, what is your code? And if you're not living your best life, maybe you need to change your code, right? And one of the things that I think is universally agreed on by the most successful people is that if you choose the easy path in your life will be hard. And if you choose the hard path in your life will be easy. So I wanted to talk to you guys today about the code, your own personal code. What is it? Have you defined it yet? And if you haven't defined it, maybe you need to think about, what are you going to leave behind when you die? Do you even care? So that's my story for today, guys. My code is heavily founded in respect, because to me, respect is more important than love. Love can be inherited. Your children are born. You love them because they're your children. They love you because they're your parent. But respect is more important because respect is earned. And I've had many talks with my sons during their tumultuous problems that, were pretty much self-inflicted, like we all do when we're kids. And I tell them, until you start living your life as a man of respect, giving respect and earning it, you're going to have these recurring problems. And right now, you're my son and I love you, but I don't respect you. And that kind of helped them want to earn their father's respect. And they have all done that. They've done that miraculously. That's my message for today, everybody. What's your code? I'd love to hear it in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, please click the like button and subscribe to my channel. We are all warriors deep down inside, and it's time for us to band together and fight the dark forces. Take care, everybody.